please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
From running costs to the environmental benefits, electric cars come with numerous advantages. As a result, global car makers are gearing up to go all electric. By 2022, electric vehicles will cost the same as their internal combustion counterparts. Batteries make up a third of the cost of an electric vehicle. As battery costs continue to fall, the demand for electric vehicles will rise. So 2020s will be the decade of the electric car. Tonight at HP Neosynth presents 18 CNBC-TV18 Overdrive Awards, let's get electrified.
Well, that was a EV that we had an audiovisual presentation for you, and that's largely the theme also of this year's CNBC-TV18 Overdrive Awards. So without further ado, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, once again for joining in. So Mahesh Babu, let me start with you, since Mahindra was the first company to have sort of embraced electric mobility at a time few thought was viable. I started my talk with the example of the SIAM's white paper. It's remarkable, not just because finally we saw industry consensus, because these days building consensus on issues within the auto industry is never an easy task. But in this case, you've come together and you've said 40% of all personal cars can become electric by the year 2030. And what perhaps is unique, that's how I see it, is that globally the push seems to be more top-down, which we are also seeing in India, but there is very little sort of discussion among industry players globally. But in India, all of you have come together on the table and said, hey, we're going to make this happen by the year 2030. What are you seeing that we are not able to see?
I think it's a first bold move and then consensus on electric. The most critical thing is stability of policy. I think whether it is electric or hybrid or any policy needs some stability. What is but changing on mobility also puts something which needs to be disruptively looked at on technology. So electric, I would say, is it's a necessity and compulsion now to be looked at very seriously, because there is a kind of disruption happening on mobility as a whole, not just a car. Car is now seen as no more a personal device, but looked at how it can be shared, how the asset can be utilized, and different ways of using it. And then electric becomes viable with that combination.
Right.
So one single technology alone is not going to disrupt. The combination of electric, shared.
But let's just take your example, Mahesh. Sorry to cut you short, but let's take your example, because you came in through your acquisition of Reva, and despite all the technological evolution we've seen, the fact of the matter is your company management still says that on the recent EESL order, Mahindra is not going to make money on those cars. So from a costing perspective, how sustainable is this model? What are you betting on, for this entire model to become viable for companies like you?
I think when you look at electric, you have to see the potential than what it is today, because today the volume of cars are much less. It is in thousands. All of us know, as an automobile industry, when you make in millions, the cost economics is different than when you make in thousands. So any new technology which is coming in because of unviable business proportion have a challenge. But the successful people are the one who roll over the hump and get into that and then break that technology into viable customer value proportion. So this is now under transition, and hence, even though we see that there are some challenges on cost, but by one single order of 10,000 or quote of tender of 10,000, and what we are seeing now today, a few more thousands voluntarily coming from the market, will change the scenario. It not only change the scenario just because of Indian volume. I think globally the volumes of electric are picking up, particularly in China, Europe, and US. And then that all put together will have some impact on battery cost and then the power electronic cost.
Arun Malhotra, let's take it from where Mahesh left off. So you're banking, the industry is banking on volumes, which is also the message that has come from the government, that let's move away from the subsidy-led model. Listen, as a country like India, we have limited resources. We need to prioritize. Clearly, electric in that sense is not a priority area, so we are going to bank on volumes. So far, what you've seen with EESL, and also now there's a talk that every government car, public fleet, will also slowly convert to electric. Do you think you're getting that volume push? Will that make it viable?
See, at this moment, the direction is very clear. I mean, we have to go to EV. But I'll call it a new dawn, but it's still a misty dawn. Because there's a lot of steps to be done in the middle of it. The steps may be in terms of infrastructure, the steps may be in terms of charging time, the steps may be in terms of cost. When we need to keep the customer's interest in mind, because ultimately the government may talk, the industry may talk, the customer has to accept it. And the way the Indian customer is, it's like dil mange more. So they want the entire, in terms of styling, in terms of performance, in terms of pickup, plus they want the benefit of electric. So that's one thing which has to be seen. The other area which you have to see, we need to be technology agnostic. Because one is 100% EV. Okay. But there are various options available also for range extenders, very strong hybrid EVs. So we need to follow a dual approach. That's the way I look at it. But direction is clear. But it'll take time. But I think it's like your vehicle you drive, it takes time in the first, second gear. But once you pick up the second, then the third, fourth gear follows clearly.
Shekhar, I promise I'll come to you because he mentioned hybrids. But since you mentioned customers and customers will have to accept, Gulpanag, you've been driving electric vehicles for what, over 3 years now? So what's up? Tell us, how has that been, and why are you driving it? Is it more out of as a conscious, sort of a customer, or is there more to it?
I've been an EV adopter for over 3.5 years now, and it began as a conscious step towards trying to make sure that I drove a vehicle that was economically, environmentally better. And I mean, there is a very, very strong economic argument for those of us who actually drive that car every day, like I do. There is a very strong economic argument. I'll leave the business gentlemen to elaborate on that. But as a customer, it's also very, very fun to drive. It's, I mean, typically, a lot of customers will, once converted to EV, never really go back to IC engines. And it's just this, I mean, let me try and give you a parallel. It's also very, very fun to drive because typically when you're parked at a traffic signal, and that's what Mr. Malhotra just spoke about, in terms of performance, without putting in any effort, because there's no lag in power delivery, it's actually peppier than all the other comparative segment cars parked next to you. Now, there are range anxiety issues, there are charging point issues, but what I speak of whenever I mean, I'm a self-professed, self-appointed advocate of electric mobility, and every time somebody tells me, oh, but we don't have enough charging stations, we don't have enough range, I try and remind them of the days when we first adopted mobile phones. We didn't rely on other people's charging stations, other people's chargers, and power banks to charge our mobiles. So I think fundamentally the responsibility of keeping your vehicle charged, making sure you have range in mind is something that has to rest with you. While I do understand the government needs to put an infrastructure in place, including but not limited to greater charging facilities, it is ultimately a customer choice. And apples to apples, I fundamentally believe it is a great option. I'd also like to add that I think there can be several symbolic steps that can be taken by the industry and the government together to make EVs more friendly. For example, I mean, I don't see why our entire government machinery not driving around in EVs. It's a very, very powerful statement. While expecting people to adopt electric mobility by 2030, is a choice, which is a personal choice, and every customer is going to have to make it, but it doesn't stop the government from mandating all public transport.
Which is what they are, which is exactly, I mean, directionally, that's where the government is heading.
But setting that example is very, very important.
Absolutely. So perhaps, we'll have Mr. Nitin Gadkari here, and we can ask him that question, since he's one of the strong proponents of this EV technology. But have you managed to convince any of your friends, hardcore IC engine enthusiasts?
Several, including aircraft engineers. I'm a pilot, so I always hang out with people who usually, talk engines and sometimes far more complex than IC engines. I think the argument for electric is very strong, and anybody who has even a slight disposition towards understanding technology, you will appreciate that it is the future. And I think the rate at which technology is being developed and the short gap between what is happening on the racetrack to how quickly it will reach the street is what makes, I think, EVs so attractive. Typically, the newest technology in motorsport is what is where all billions of dollars of R&D money goes into. Now that will never end up in a street car. It will probably end up in a high-end sports car which not everybody can afford. Having said that, the technology that drives, say, electric racing, Formula E, is not very far from being adopted in the kind of cars that we are talking about, and that is directly going to impact us. And if you can see the movement in the last 4 years, it's staggering.
Yeah, and we've seen democratization of technology across different industries. But thanks, Gul. Let's get in Roland Folger. Roland, you were recently quoted in the press as saying, we don't even know whether EVs will survive till 2030. Sorry for putting you on the spot. I should have pre-warned you. If somebody finds a way to simplify hydrogen technology for cars, it will be the technology of the future. India is betting that a lot goes right. What were you thinking?
Well, what goes through my head is basically that analyzing the situation we're at the moment in, with government statements, with statements and directions from the industry, is that we are starting to run before we can walk. My first impression, gut feeling. And what do I mean by that? We're setting targets that no other country in the world believes they can do. India, with 2030, has put a poster out there, a marker out there that is beyond anything that anybody can think they can do, which is courageous and needs applause as well and support. But the key point from my side is, have we thought this through? Is this really what we want? And with the statement that you just quoted, what I meant was to say that if we fixate everything on electricity, why do we think that this is going to be the only solution or even the solution? What happens if by 2025 we suddenly find out hydrogen has made some significant steps forward, and then all the investment that have gone in a very, very expensive and disruptive infrastructure, talking about charging stations and everything else across the country, is for nothing. And then they need to be converted to hydrogen charging stations. And I'm not sure whether we have all the facts at the moment on the table to make such a decision. And there's also one thing that I wanted to comment on that I heard a lot, and that electric technology is so environmental conscious. This is also, I think, sometimes where we have a tendency to fool ourselves. Because frankly, they're only helpful in the area where they're used. Because electricity still does not come out of your plug in somewhere, it's coming out of power plants. And at the moment, these power plants, according to our investigations, are heavily used with coal, with gas and oil. So all of that stuff that we try to, as the automotive industry, with a lot of effort and technological advancement, to get out of the air, these guys are blowing out without filters. So unless that issue is tackled, and we have very clean energy really being used for vehicles, predominantly solar, predominantly nuclear, we will not have a justification to really take these vehicles, for instance, over Bharat Stage 6 vehicles, because at the moment they're not as clean, not even as clean as Bharat Stage 4, and they're far away from Bharat Stage 6.
Shekhar, let me get you in, because Toyota, you're a strong proponent of hybrid technology, and many also believe that move towards hybrid will not dislocate our supply chain. It will be less disruptive, and perhaps that is a more prudent approach. Shekhar, how is Toyota now? Because clearly from the government's point of view, they are saying that we don't care about hybrids. It's electric is what we want.
I think, first of all, let's understand where this debate originated from. This debate about electric vehicles started with the government's objective of reducing the oil bill. They wanted to reduce the import bill. They also wanted, as a public health measure, to reduce the extent of pollution in our cities. I think these two objectives, I think all of us on this panel, the entire industry, we are wedded to. We want to see a reduction in the imports of oil, and we want to see a reduction in the pollution levels. That said, which is probably the best technology that will advance ourselves, India, towards this goal? And I think when you set out to answer that question, you will find that there are a host of technologies that offer competing benefits, competing advantages, and there are some certain disadvantages. When we examine, given Toyota's experience globally, and we do business in over 170 countries, and we have 42 manufacturing plants, and we have sold many a hybrid vehicle. I think we've gone well past the million mark. We find that from a consumer point of view, the first thing that the consumer is most anxious about is range. And if you can address that, there's no doubt in my mind that electric vehicles are very good, that they are probably the future, and they will come to stay. Now, to what extent they will stay, whether it's going to be the extent of 20%, 30%, 40%, 80%, nobody can tell. And let's also remember one other thing. In certain pockets, in certain areas, electrics will prevail. I mean, you'll have maybe even 70 or 80%. In certain other areas, you may have only about 20% electric vehicle penetration. That may have much to do with the topography, with the habits, with the incentives that are currently being offered, et cetera, et cetera. So in our view, hybrids we have touted as the best option forward.
Do you feel somewhere also the government has taken a hardline approach? Sorry. Do you think also the government has taken a very hardline approach, insisting on electric and not hybrid? Because if you look at the GST rates, 12% versus there is no preferential treatment. Is that also a bit of a concern that, okay, I mean, you know, if you can't bring down the GST rates on hybrids to 12%, how about at 18%? Do you think the hardline approach is also a bit of a concern?
Yes, the hardline approach is a concern, but I think it has more to do with the lack of understanding of what a hybrid can do for the country, what it can do for the consumer. There are any number of hybrid players with that relevant technology. There are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Yeah. And I think these are the kind of technologies and products that need to get rolled out. What the government needs to do is to have a technology agnostic approach, yeah, and then say, you know, let the great race begin.
Gul, you wanted to make a point, and then Arun, and then Mahesh. Yeah.
After you.
Yeah, I think what Shekhar pointed out, you know, we in Nissan started the journey on electric vehicles 7 years back, and Nissan Leaf is still the largest selling EV, and there were 300,000 vehicles on the road. But there's another journey which has started strongly everywhere in the world. Just to take Norway as a country which has got the highest penetration electric vehicles, it's something like 40%. Of 22% is 100% EV, and 18% is EV hybrid. Now, hybrid is a slightly misunderstood term. Is it a mild hybrid? You set a term in terms of performance, you set a term in terms of fuel efficiency, in terms of emissions, and today there are enough technologies available where you can jump leap because you want more people to get into the bandwagon of electric vehicles. If you follow the 100% EV route, there will be a journey, but be slow and steady. But when you come to strong hybrid, and you can lay down clear terms and conditions in terms of fuel efficiency, in terms of even emissions, and then it happens. Just to take an example, Nissan launched the e-Note vehicle in Japan, and it's become the largest selling vehicle in Japan. What it basically does is, it's a small IC engine which charges the battery inside, but the output in terms of pickup, acceleration, braking, driving, all is EV. So looking at this India's infrastructure, India's geographical spread of 3.2 million square kilometers, 650 districts, we need to follow, as Shekhar said, a technology agnostic approach. Let the journey begin. We need 100% EV, but we also need EV range extenders or strong hybrids, which terms conditions can be told.
All right, good.
I just want to come in two things. With all due respect, India has proved twice in the recent past that it is sometimes bizarrely possible to run before you can walk. We've seen that with the telecom sort of movement in India. We had the fastest growth of mobile telephones in India without going through the landline loop. And we've seen people who are not educated in the conventional manner still able to communicate via voice and video over data. So because anything that is disruptive will come and change the way things work, it is arguable that it is possible through the aggressive intervention of the government, maybe in the form of 2030, to push people towards an idea where they can start thinking electric. Because if they don't start thinking electric, they're not going to adopt electric, one. Two, the merits and demerits of hydrogen versus electric, of course, can be debated in maybe another forum or another panel. Suffice to say that the hydrogen dissemination infrastructure largely will still mirror the conventional hydrocarbon delivery infrastructure. So we will still be, at some point, effectively, I mean, the process of extracting hydrogen isn't as simple, and much has been written about it. So it's not as simple. Having, as perhaps, again, I would not want to go into the details of it, but it is a far more complex system of extraction and delivery, which will require a parallel infrastructure, much like hydrocarbon industry. Lastly, given India's massive plans that have been announced by this government of going solar and of course, of going, I think several hundred gigawatts of plans for solar alone have been announced, in addition to which another 75 gigawatts of other renewable energy. We will be the largest producers of solar energy by 2025. Yes, today, bulk of our electricity comes from thermal power, but the point is, like Mahesh said, the idea is to be future ready. We can't plan electric seeing today's thermal output. We need to see 7 years hence what kind of solar output we're going to be seeing, and because that charge is largely going to come from solar, I think it makes a very, very strong environmental case as well as an economic case, and ultimately, yes, I do hope it will reduce the oil bill as well.
I can see all my panelists itching to go. Okay, Mahesh, you can...
I think...
though I think you'll perhaps agree a lot with what Gul is saying, considering Mahendra's big bet.
The right time when Mr. Nitin Gadkari himself is coming for me to tell that India needs to take a leapfrog in technology and EV. The EV, what we are saying is not just incremental steps, and India is very unique. Whenever we say EV, we think it is car. I think we have to look at India has a very significant population of two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and adapting four-wheelers. From 20 cars per 1,000, we are aiming towards 500. So there is a huge potential for us to bring in new customers. And we always say customer don't want it. You have a proof that she is sitting as an electric customer
absolutely.
and saying that she wanted.
Before we wrap up this conversation, let us not quibble over pure electric or pure hybrid, but just the way IC engines have been and the way they've powered automobiles for the last almost 100 years, are pure IC engines now sort of nearing its death? I recently had an interview with the Maruti CEO, and he said that Maruti will now look at electrifying all their vehicles. They said that pure IC engines, that may have become a thing of the past. Maybe quick one-line comment before we wrap this up. Shekhar, let's start with you.
On IC engines?
Are pure IC engines a thing of the past?
I don't agree with this proposition, because I do think that there is space for IC engines. Certainly not to the extent of the 100% prevalence that it has today, but it will come down gradually. But I do think IC engines will continue to have a role in the economy of today.
Roland Folger?
Short to midterm, definitely ICE engine have a very good reason to stay, because at the moment, faulting other opportunities to get our clean energy from, there's no alternative to them. That being said, I have to also mention that we as a company have now announced also that we will bring 9 electric-only engines and vehicle drivetrains that focus only on electric vehicles. There is an 11 billion investment set up, euros set up for that purpose alone. So we're committed to electric energy. The question is only, it needs to be driven by customers and it needs to be driven by public demand.
All right. Mahesh, quick last comment. IC engines, are they dead?
Will stay, but it will no more be exciting. I think the excitement will come from electric. The future is going to be the mobility, and that's going to be electric. So you want to be in the excitement, or you want to be in playing around field? That you got to decide.
Arun Malhotra?
IC engines will not die out initially, but the proportion would start falling. It will depend on the technology. Just to give an example, about 25 years back, people said the rotary engine will replace the reciprocating IC engine. It didn't happen. So there will be a lot of technologies which will come in. But clearly, it is 98%.
Let us not try forecasting the future.
So future, it will come down, and the technology, the cost, and the customer acceptance, and the government support, all these things will make a difference. But IC engines are not going to die immediately.
Gulpana, final word.
Very, very quick. The most efficient internal combustion engine is at about 46%. The most efficient IC engine is 46% efficient, and those are the kinds found in Formula 1 cars. Just going to throw the fact that an electric engine already, electric transmission is already at 93% efficiency. Purely going from an efficiency perspective, as a technology enthusiast, I think the battle is going to be very clearly won by electric in about 15, 20 years.